There are stories that inspire, stories that touch hearts across generations, and then there are stories that change the course of history. The life of Pope Francis is one such story, a journey of faith, humility, and service. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, he rose from humble beginnings in Argentina to become one of the most influential spiritual leaders of our time. His story is not just about his rise to the papacy, but also about his devotion to service, his deep connection with people from all walks of life, and his relentless pursuit of peace and love. This is the story of Pope Francis, a man whose faith was as strong as his compassion, whose leadership was grounded in simplicity, and whose legacy will live on for generations. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born on December 17, 1936, in the vibrant city of Buenos Aires, Argentina. His family was of Italian descent, his father, Mario Bergoglio, an accountant, and his mother, Regina Maria Sivori, a homemaker. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, young Jorge's life was far from extravagant. The Bergoglios lived in a modest apartment, and money was often tight. But despite their financial struggles, Jorge's parents instilled in him values of hard work, respect, and, above all, faith. From a young age, Jorge was known for his keen sense of curiosity and deep sense of compassion. His early years were marked by the love and warmth of his family, especially his mother, who was a devout Catholic and whose faith left a lasting imprint on him. Though the family was not wealthy, they found richness in their closeness, with love and faith as the cornerstones of their home. Jorge's connection to the church began early. As a child, he attended the local school where he excelled academically. His teachers noticed his intelligence and his compassionate nature. But what stood out the most was his deep interest in spirituality and his questions about God, life, and faith. These questions would shape his path in ways that no one could have predicted at the time. As Jorge entered his teenage years, he faced the challenges typical of adolescence: identity, belonging, and the search for meaning. It was during this time that he began to feel a strong calling to religious life. However, this wasn't a sudden or dramatic event. For Jorge, the calling was more of a quiet realization, a feeling deep within him that would grow stronger with time. In high school, he attended the prestigious Escuela Militar de Aviación, a military school where he learned discipline and responsibility. His time at the school also exposed him to new ideas and experiences that would influence his future decisions. He developed a strong sense of duty and an awareness of the complexities of the world. Yet even as a teenager, Jorge was deeply drawn to the teachings of Christ. He was known for his deep reflections on Scripture and often attended Mass with his family. It was during these formative years that Jorge had a life-changing experience. He fell seriously ill with a severe lung infection, which required surgery. The experience was a turning point for him. The fear of mortality, combined with the support he received from his family and faith, led him to reconsider his life's direction. In the months that followed, Jorge made a decision that would change everything. He decided to pursue a life devoted to God. At the age of 21, Jorge made the bold decision to leave behind his secular ambitions and enter the seminary to become a priest. This decision came after much thought and reflection. For Jorge, the choice was not about fleeing from the world, but about entering into a deeper, more meaningful relationship with God. He was drawn to the idea of serving others, especially the marginalized and the poor. In 1958, he entered the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, marking the beginning of his formal religious education and spiritual journey. The Jesuits, known for their intellectual rigor and commitment to social justice, provided an ideal environment for Jorge to nurture his faith and develop a deep theological understanding. During his time in the seminary, he was influenced by the teachings of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, whose principles of discernment, humility, and service would become a guiding force in his life. Jorge's time in the seminary wasn't without challenges. He faced rigorous academic and spiritual demands, but it was here that he began to shape the person he would become. His commitment to social justice deepened, and his desire to work among the poor grew stronger. But perhaps more than anything, it was his growing relationship with God that would define his path forward. In the summer of 1958, a young Jorge Mario Bergoglio made an important decision that would shape the rest of his life. Born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, he was deeply inspired by his faith, seeking not just to understand the teachings of the Church, but to live them. At the age of 21, he joined the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order, beginning a path that would lead him through spiritual growth, intellectual development, and a lifetime of service. In the early years of his formation, Bergoglio faced the rigors of Jesuit discipline. The Society of Jesus was known for its intellectualism, its focus on education, and its emphasis on social justice. For Jorge, who was known for his humility and strong sense of compassion, the Jesuit path was both a spiritual and intellectual calling. He entered the novitiate in 1958, and after years of formation, made his first vows in 1960. During his early years, Bergoglio spent time in various regions, including Chile, where he was shaped by the complex socio-political landscape of Latin America. The theological and social movements of the 1960s and 70s, particularly the rise of liberation theology, would later influence much of his work as a priest, bishop, and eventually pope. He was ordained a priest in 1969, and it was around this time that he began to develop his deep understanding of pastoral care, blending academic rigor with a heartfelt commitment to serving the poor and marginalized. Though the world around him was in tumult, Jorge's journey with the Society of Jesus shaped his worldview, one that would emphasize solidarity, humility, and peace. As a young priest, Bergoglio's influence grew in Argentina. He served in a variety of roles, including as a provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina from 1973 to 1979. His leadership during this tumultuous period was characterized by his commitment to the Jesuit mission of social justice and his opposition to the military dictatorship that ruled Argentina at the time. The Argentine Dirty War, 1976-1983, led to widespread human rights abuses, and the young priest's resolve was tested. While Bergoglio was never an outspoken figure in the political sense, his actions demonstrated his firm stand for the protection of human rights. He risked his life in secret efforts to safeguard those persecuted by the regime, offering refuge and working behind the scenes to ensure the Church acted in accordance with the moral teachings of Christ. Though often criticized for his cautious public stance on certain issues, those who knew Bergoglio in this time spoke of his deep moral clarity and unwavering dedication to the poor. His ascension within the Church's hierarchy was steady, yet humble. He was appointed Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires in 1992 and later became Archbishop in 1998. As a bishop, he was known for his simplicity and pastoral sensitivity, gaining the trust of both his clergy and the people of Buenos Aires. By the time Bergoglio became a cardinal in 2001, he had already begun to emerge as a unique voice within the global Catholic Church. His pastoral approach, emphasizing mercy and social justice, began to resonate more widely as the Church faced various challenges in the new millennium. Bergoglio's leadership in Buenos Aires was marked by his efforts to engage with people on the margins of society. He was seen as a man of deep compassion and understanding, and his pastoral focus helped him build connections with the urban poor. However, it was his public support for social justice, environmental issues, and interfaith dialogue that made him a distinct figure in the Vatican. His candid and often direct manner, along with his deep spirituality, made him a popular figure among ordinary people. Though he was often seen as a reformist, he also firmly upheld the traditional teachings of the Church. As Cardinal of Buenos Aires, Bergoglio became one of the most influential voices in Latin America, and his thoughts on ecclesiastical reform and social issues began to garner global attention. Though his name was not among the favourites when the papal conclave of 2005 took place following the death of Pope John Paul II, his reputation continued to grow, particularly in the wake of the 2005 conclave that elected Pope Benedict XVI. Still, it was clear that Cardinal Bergoglio was seen as a thoughtful leader who could potentially bring a different tone to the papacy, one more focused on the Church's role in social justice and compassion. In 2013, following the unexpected resignation of Pope Benedict XVI, the papal conclave chose Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio as the 266th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. Taking the name Francis in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, he immediately signaled a desire to shift the Church's focus towards the poor and marginalized, a theme that had defined his pastoral career. Pope Francis brought a refreshing humility to the Vatican. He chose not to live in the papal apartments, instead staying in a simple guest house. His gestures, like washing the feet of prisoners or reaching out to the homeless, made him a beloved figure around the world. His papacy was marked by his emphasis on mercy, inclusion, and social justice. As Pope, Francis initiated a series of reforms aimed at making the Vatican more transparent and accountable. He sought to address the clerical sex abuse scandal, calling for greater transparency and justice. Pope Francis also revitalized the Church's engagement with global issues, including poverty, climate change, and the refugee crisis. His focus on interfaith dialogue, particularly with Muslims and Jews, furthered his legacy as a Pope of peace and reconciliation. Francis's teaching on the environment, articulated in his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si', was seen as a landmark moment in the Church's engagement with global issues. In this document, he urged Catholics to take greater responsibility for the planet, framing environmental care as a moral imperative. Despite his achievements, his papacy was not without its challenges. The Church continued to grapple with internal divisions, and his calls for reform sometimes met resistance from conservative elements. Yet Pope Francis remained steadfast in his message of compassion, hope, and social justice. As Pope Francis entered his later years, his health became a topic of concern. Despite physical setbacks, including a significant knee issue that required surgery, he remained active in his mission. His trips around the world, where he engaged with the faithful and the downtrodden, reflected his enduring commitment to his papal responsibilities. Even as his health declined, he continued to preach and teach with passion. In his later years, Pope Francis reflected deeply on the trajectory of his life and papacy. He spoke frequently about the importance of humility, noting how his faith and commitment to God had shaped every aspect of his ministry. Despite all the struggles, doubts, and challenges, he remained convinced that the path of the Church was one of service to humanity. In his final days, Pope Francis often reflected on the lessons he had learned, particularly the importance of forgiveness, mercy, and love. His leadership of the Church, particularly in times of crisis, had emphasized these values. He was revered not just as a leader but as a spiritual father to millions around the world. As Pope Francis prepared to pass on, he expressed gratitude for the journey he had undertaken and the ways in which his faith had guided him. His legacy, however, would endure. The world would remember him as a pope who chose simplicity over grandeur, compassion over power, and justice over comfort. Pope Francis passed away peacefully, leaving behind a church that had been fundamentally shaped by his vision and leadership. His teachings on mercy, social justice, and the care of creation would continue to inspire generations long after his time. The final farewell. The burial of Pope Francis. Rome, once a bustling metropolis of tourists and pilgrims, fell into a reverent hush. The cobblestones of the Eternal City seemed to bear the weight of grief as millions gathered, physically and digitally, to witness the final chapter in the life of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis. A day unlike any other. The Vatican had not seen a moment like this in generations. As dawn broke, clouds hovered low over St. Peter's Basilica. The air was still, almost heavy with silence. At precisely 6 a.m., the massive bronze doors of the basilica opened for the last viewing. Lines of people, some who had waited all night, began filing in, each with their own reasons, memories, and grief. Maria Fernandez, an elderly woman from Buenos Aires, stood near the front of the line, clutching a small Argentinian flag and a photo of Pope Francis as a young cardinal. Tears streaked her weathered cheeks. "I was just a girl when he became Archbishop," she whispered to a reporter nearby. "He baptized my grandson, visited my sister in the hospital. He wasn't just a pope to us. He was family." Inside the basilica, the body of Pope Francis lay in peaceful repose. His white cassock was plain, without ornate embroidery. A silver pectoral cross rested on his chest, the same one he had worn since his days as bishop. His papal ring had been removed, symbolizing the end of his earthly reign. A voice for the voiceless. Among those present was Amina, a refugee from Syria, now living in France. She had met Pope Francis in 2016 during his visit to the island of Lesbos. "I remember him holding my baby. He looked in my eyes and said, 'Your tears are not forgotten,'" Amina recalled, now holding the hand of her daughter, aged 9. "I came today because he gave me hope when the world had forgotten us." A few rows away stood Chief Rafael Quispe, a leader of an indigenous community from Bolivia. Dressed in his ceremonial garb, he held a handmade wooden cross. "He gave voice to the forest," he said in Spanish. "He defended our rivers, our lands, our people when few would listen. Papa Francisco is one of us." A global assembly. As the hour of the funeral approached, world leaders arrived, many in silence, others exchanging gentle nods. Pope Francis had transcended ideology and borders. United Nations officials, presidents, royalty, Nobel laureates and peace activists gathered in respectful stillness. It was not a moment of political display, but human reverence. At 10:20 a.m. sharp, the grand bells of St. Peter's tolled across the square, and the funeral mass began. A successor's tribute. Standing before the congregation was Pope John XVIII, the man chosen to carry on Francis's legacy. "Today we bury a servant," he began, "a man who never sought a throne but carried a cross. He walked with the wounded, spoke with the forgotten, and lived not above his people, but among them." His voice cracked as he paused, and for a moment, even the crowd of thousands seemed to breathe in sync with him. He reminded us that the church must have dirty feet if it walks where Christ walked. He reminded us that holiness is found not in power, but in compassion. The people's pope. As the liturgy progressed, choirs from Africa, Asia, Latin America and Europe joined together in a breathtaking hymn, Ubi caritas et amor, Deus ibi est, where charity and love are, God is there. The music, echoing through the colonnades, felt like a balm for the soul. The gospel was read in multiple languages, and prayers were offered not just for the church but for the planet, the poor, the prisoners, and the persecuted, echoing Francis's consistent message throughout his papacy. Moments of personal testimony. Following communion, 3 short reflections were offered by people whom Francis had personally touched. The first was Brother Thomas, a formerly incarcerated man from Italy. "He visited my prison in 2014. I was angry, bitter, but he looked at me and said, 'God doesn't look at what you did. He sees what you can become.' I left prison 2 years later. I became a lay brother. Today I'm here because of him." Next came Sister Yoonji, a nun from South Korea who had worked with Pope Francis on interfaith peace initiatives. He told us that dialogue is not about agreement, it's about encounter. He brought together those who had not spoken in decades. He told us peace begins at the table, not the battlefield. The final voice was Luca, a 12-year-old boy from Naples who had sent the Pope a handwritten letter years earlier and received a personal reply. "I told him I was afraid of war," Luca said shyly. He wrote back and said, "You are the hope. Never stop asking questions. Never stop dreaming." I still have the letter under my pillow. As the final blessing was given, 8 Swiss guards stepped forward to lift the coffin. The crowd rose. In the square, screens showed the simple cypress wood, carved with the Chi Rho symbol and the words Franciscus, Servus, Servorum Dei, Francis, servant of the servants of God. A soft rain began to fall, gentle, steady, as if the heavens themselves were weeping. From the choir came a closing song. "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." The melody floated into the air, carried on the wind. The coffin was lowered into the crypt beneath St. Peter's, not far from St. John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI. But unlike the others, his tomb was unadorned, a single slab of stone with his name, dates, and the words, "He walked with the poor." As the final soil was laid, Pope John XXIII whispered the words of St. Francis of Assisi, from whom the late Pope had taken his name. Even before the ceremony ended, across the world, from barrios in Argentina to slums in the Philippines, from refugee camps in Lebanon to mountain villages in Ethiopia, church bells rang, candles were lit, and prayers were said. Francis had passed into memory, but not into silence. His voice would echo in every act of mercy, every stand for justice, and every humble gesture of love. Thank you for watching from the beginning of the story of Pope Francis till the end. You are a star. Thank you for tuning in. If you found this content helpful, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications to stay updated on our latest posts. See you next time.